Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to Creative Piecemeal. I'm your host, Tammy, and today I'm joined by author Paulette Kennedy. Originally from the Ozarks, she now divides her time between her Missouri hometown and Los Angeles, where she lives with her family in a menagerie of rescue pets. When she isn't writing, she enjoys tending to her garden, knitting, and finding unique vintage treasures at thrift stores and flea markets. Paulette's next release is The Witch of Tin Mountain, a witchy Southern Gothic set in rural northern Arkansas during the Great Depression, and actually just released this past week. So congratulations and happy book birthday.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Tammy.
You're welcome. Listeners, at the end of the show notes, you'll be able to find links to buy all of Paulette's books. So definitely go get them if you're into that awesome Gothic stuff. But we're going to jump right in to what led you to the fine and creative arts.
I had always enjoyed reading as a child, and so my summers were spent with stacks of books. I would go to the library and I would check out tons of books, and I never really thought about being a writer until some of my teachers in elementary school told me that I had a little bit of an aptitude for it. And I always like kind of making up my own characters and things like that as a child. So that's kind of where it all started. And then whenever I went to college, I majored in English, and I started kind of pursuing writing fiction a little bit on the side. I was writing a lot of academic papers for my major, but my academic advisor at the time told me that I had real gift or an aptitude for writing. And so I started kind of going to writing conferences and studying craft and everything like that. And I'd always kind of dabbled in a lot of the creative arts. I like to draw and paint, and I was also a musician. So there were like a lot of different creative avenues that I was interested in, but writing is the one that really stuck and kind of was a lifelong thing. So I started seriously writing and started my first novel when I was 19 years old. I didn't finish it. I actually didn't finish a complete novel until I was 40 years old, and didn't become published until I was, 46. It was a long journey for me, and I learned a lot of things. There were a lot of ups and downs, but I'm here now, and I love being an author. It's wonderful.
That's fantastic. And I love that you do a lot of different creative pursuits and that you didn't give up on what you wanted to do.
Thank you. Yeah, there are definitely times I had dry spells. I didn't write pretty much at all during my 30s. I was more focused on raising my daughter, and also I was really interested in photography. And so I started pursuing photography as like my creative outlet during that time period. And I was actually a professional photographer for a number of years. And so I did that. And that's kind of a way of telling stories using a camera. And so I did that. And then I started getting back into writing in my late 30s, like as I was getting ready to turn 40. I started feeling a real drive and a motivation to start writing again. So I started writing the novel that would eventually become Parting the Veil in my early 40s.
Excellent. What drew you to writing historical fiction?
I had always been drawn to historical fiction from the time I was a teenager. Those were the books I read. Those were the books that I was interested in, especially Gothic historical fiction. I was really interested in authors like Victoria Holt and V.C. Andrews, and authors that kind of had a little bit of speculative, a little bit of a creepy factor and mixed in with the historical fiction. So I kind of started dabbling and writing stories and things like that in my mid-teens, I would say. I really just enjoyed the way that historical fiction could be so transportive, like it could take you to another time and place. you might learn a few things while you're learning about these characters. But really, the thing that I love about historical fiction is kind of how much it teaches us that people kind of remain the same, like no matter what era they're living in, even though their situations might be different politically and socially and economically from what we're experiencing in the modern era, like people are people. And so learning about the struggles and the challenges that they faced and overcame, and especially as the Gothic goes, just having those fun spooky and creepy elements added into the mix was something that really drew me.
Excellent. Is there a type or genre that you gravitate to in addition to historical fiction, whether it's something you'd like to dabble in the future or something that you like to take like in terms of books when you're on vacation?
Yeah, so what I like to read, I always say that I read and I write dark a lot. I love thrillers, I love suspense, especially like domestic suspense, like the things that Gillian Flynn writes. I love books like that. Those are quick, fast reads that I can like get through in a day. And I love not being able to put a book down. But I also love romance too. I'm a big romance reader, especially historical romance. And I always say I read romance as a palate cleanser from all the dark stuff. Like it's a nice contrast with horror and with gothic fiction and suspense. You go from murder and all of that to like the feel good emotions that romance brings, and knowing that you're going to have a happily ever after at the end and won't have to worry about your main character dying is kind of a relief sometimes. So yeah, yes. I read widely though. I read all genres.
That's excellent. And they always say, if you're going to write, it's important to read widely because you never know what will sort of inspire or influence what you're doing in terms of your projects. Are there any writing tropes that you absolutely love?
Oh, I love the trope of the woman wandering around in the forbidden part of the castle or the mansion. Of course, I put that in Parting the Veil. That's a big part of Parting the Veil. My favorite part of the book to write whenever I did that. But as far as romance, like there are a lot of romance tropes that I really like. I love enemies to lovers. I love lovers to enemies. I like the kind of inverse of that. There's a lot of fun tropes. I think the key is making them your own. When you're writing, you learn how to see the tropes that work really well for your story and incorporate those. And like there are ways to do that can make your story really stand out. And I love kind of playing with tropes and subverting tropes too, like kind of turning them on their head.
Without giving too much away, what was one of your favorite parts of writing your latest book, The Witch of Tin Mountain?
I always love the research phase, and the research phase for me kind of starts before I begin writing and also like all during the time that I am writing, pretty much until I turn the book in to my editor. So I really enjoyed learning about the folklore of the Ozarks going way back whenever I was writing The Witch of Tin Mountain. I also enjoyed learning about like herbal lore and medicine and different like forms of natural witchcraft, like green witchcraft, that I studied whenever I was writing that novel. And also I enjoyed like going into a deep dive with the Salem witch trials. There was a lot that I didn't know about everything that happened in Salem. In school we're kind of taught the surface level things, and I read 3 whole books on the Salem witch trials whenever I was crafting that book, and it really was very fascinating. So research is something that really drives me in with all of my books, but especially with that one, it was really fun to just go in and like learn about a lot of different things that I incorporated in the novel.
I definitely enjoy the research part too, to an extent. After a while, it's like, okay, your brain feels full,
Yeah, you have to kind of like split it up into like parts and sessions and different times for different things. It can be overwhelming if you try to just do it all at once before you even start writing. Like I try to do like the broad spectrum research first so that I'm not making like any like global mistakes. Like I'm not forgetting about major wars or major economic events that could impact my characters in a way that would be undeniable. But like that small like meta level research, like at the detail level. You can always do that during copy edits. You can do it during like your revisions and things like that. So I kind of split my research up and kind of divide and conquer kind of way.
Do you ever visit the places that you write about?
I do whenever I can. During the pandemic, that's whenever I was writing Parting the Veil. I couldn't get to the UK like I would have liked to. So I had to rely on friends who were from there. And I also relied on like Google Maps and looking at things like with a bird's eye view, lots of research, lots of reading. That's something that I really wish I would have been able to get to Hampshire and do boots on the ground research for that book. But I just, unfortunately, because of COVID, we couldn't travel. So I did the best that I could. And, whenever I was writing The Witch of Ten Mountain, I was in the Ozarks again. I had been going back and forth between Missouri and California while I was writing that book because I was helping to take care of my mother who had cancer. And so I was living with her and caring for her and living in that environment whenever I was crafting the novel. And I think it really comes through. I mean, I'd grown up there. I've lived there for the majority of my life. I didn't move away until I was 42 years old. So I know that region really, really well, southern Missouri and northern Arkansas. So I think that really added to it. And my next book, The Devil and Mrs. Davenport, that also takes place in the Ozarks, although it takes place in kind of a mid-sized college town that's loosely based on my hometown. I kind of have that natural knowledge of the area that I think hopefully will come through.
Excellent. You also live in Los Angeles. Do you ever think you'll write something based in California?
Oh, absolutely. I have a couple ideas actually that are based in California. I can't really talk about them too much because they haven't sold yet, but I love California. There's a lot of gothic energy here that might be surprising to people, even though it's sunny and warm most of the time. There's lots of moodiness with the fog coming in the morning, and wintertime is my favorite season in LA because it feels like fall everywhere else. And so I love winter time here. And absolutely. I plan on setting books here in California. Hopefully they'll sell. So we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Yes, excellent. Fingers crossed. I can't wait. Sort of off topic here, but what are some of your favorite foods to recommend wherever you are, whether it's in the Ozarks or California?
Well, in California, I definitely recommend tacos. Like actual tacos from taco trucks are the best. They're phenomenal. Sushi, we have really good sushi here. Pretty much any food that you can imagine is in Los Angeles. It's spoiled me horribly. Like I can pretty much get any kind of cuisine from anywhere in the world here and get it delivered to my door. So I love that about LA. There's also a lot of locally owned restaurants here. We have chains, of course, but by and large, most of the restaurants in like the area that I live in are owned by local people. And so it's really nice because you're getting cuisine from the people from the areas that the cuisine originated. And so it's wonderful to have that genuine food. Now in the Ozarks, there's some very Ozark specific things that I love to eat whenever I go back home. One of them is cashew chicken, and we have our own style of cashew chicken in Springfield, Missouri. And it's unlike cashew chicken anywhere else, and it's very much a tradition. So I love to eat that. I also love frozen custard from Andy's Frozen Custard. It's amazing. And so those are two of the things that I have to have whenever I come home. There's also a wonderful Mexican restaurant in Springfield called La Paloma that I love to eat at, and they have really good spinach enchiladas. So that's what I always recommend when people go there.
Nice. That sounds very good. We're going to jump back into writing questions. You talked about, of course, one of your favorite parts of the creative process being research, but do you have any other favorite parts and also least favorite parts of the creative process?
Well, my favorite part is revisions. I love going into a story that I've already gotten down on print or paper and making it better. I love like at the line level, making a sentence more beautiful, like looking at my word choices and either using synonyms and bringing in different ways of expressing my character's emotions and things like that. because I think when you're drafting, you're just trying to get it down. So I tend to be a really bad word repeater in the drafting phase, and people sigh a lot and they're breathing a lot and things like that. So I love going back during revisions and refining a lot of those things and making it better at like a deep, detailed level. My least favorite part is drafting. I wish I loved it more because it's an absolutely necessary part of what I do, but it can be a struggle for me sometimes. I really find that having a word count goal for the day helps me. Kind of knowing when my deadline is and knowing how many words per day I need to get down to make that deadline is really important for me. I think deadlines can be really scary, but they can also be really, really helpful. And so usually I have enough time with my deadlines to where if I can get 1,000 words a day down, I'm going to meet my deadline and still feel satisfied with my writing life as it relates to my personal life. And I'm not going to feel tied to my desk, to get that draft finished.
Do you have any advice writing wise that you absolutely follow and any writing advice that you absolutely ignore?
The writing advice that I follow now, I didn't always follow it, is to draft to get the story down, to just get it finished. I wasn't always that way. I was a real perfectionist for a number of years, and that's why I never finished anything. I would go back and I would re-edit, revise as I drafted, and I would get stuck. I would just keep going over that same paragraph or that same chapter over and over again. I get maybe 50 pages into a manuscript, and then I would just burn out. I get tired. Because you can honestly, like with this, you can try to go back and perfect something right up until the publishing date. And even after it publishes, when you read it again, if you read it again, I don't ever read my work after it's published because of this, but you'll still see things that you would change. So it's really important, I feel like, and I would advise anyone who has the same kind of perfectionistic personality that I do, just really try to get that first draft, no matter how ugly it is, no matter how much you don't like it, when you go back to reread it, to get it down and then fix it later, because you can't fix something that's not there.
Very true, and excellent advice. Definitely hard for some people like myself too, hard to take that advice.
Yeah. And some people can draft and revise and keep going and meet their deadline and get something finished. I'm not one of them. So I've had that hard lesson demonstrated several times in my life. I have probably 10 manuscripts that are sitting on my unfinished shelf.
Is there any writing advice that just does not work for you?
I would say the writing advice that doesn't work for me would be that you have to write every day. Even though I try to write every day and I really get up every morning with the intention to write, sometimes life gets in the way. And sometimes I have to put it to the side. And after my mom passed away in October, the end, I couldn't write for a month. I wanted to, but I couldn't. I would sit down and the words just would not come. So I think that edict that you have to write every day, if that works for you, that's absolutely wonderful. If it doesn't work for you, don't beat yourself up about it. We all have hot and cold times as creative people. And if you need that time off also to generate new ideas and to let your brain rest so that you can work out those plotting issues and other issues that might come up as you're drafting. I find that if I get stuck, if I'll just take a couple days off and watch some movies or read some books for pleasure, that my interest in my work will return and I'll be refreshed and ready to look at it with new eyes and move forward.
You do a lot of other creative pursuits. Would you like to talk a little bit about that? What have you been working on other than your books?
Well, I love hobbies and crafts and things like that. I'm not working on anything else that I would consider monetizing. I kind of learned my lesson with photography that way. I loved making my living as a photographer for a while, but then it got really difficult for me. So I love to do things like knit, and I love to bake. I love cooking. I love all of those crafty, creative things that are also practical. I really try to like dedicate some time every day to creative pursuits that are strictly for my own pleasure, that aren't going to like net money or any kind of like attention outside of my home, like just to do things for the sheer enjoyment of doing them.
That's wonderful. Is there anything that you have not tried that you want to try craft wise?
Craft wise, I would say sculpture, maybe. I've always kind of been curious about sculpture, but I've never really done it. I had a couple projects in my high school art class that were fun. I think since I'm kind of a kinesthetic hands-on learner, I might enjoy that. So that might be something I might pick up at some point.
Nice. That sounds like it'd be really fun.
Yeah, I think so too. Good stress relief, I think, pounding on some clay.
Right? Yeah. I took a pottery class in high school for credit, and it was honestly the most difficult thing I'd ever done.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. It was one of those things where it's like, oh, this can't be too hard. It's going to be pottery class. I'll get an easy A. Oh no, I worked so hard in that class.
I can imagine, especially with working with a wheel, like working with a pottery wheel, like I've heard that the smallest of movements can change the way that that pot looks very dramatically. So like learning how to like move your hands over the clay as it's turning is like a huge part of learning how to throw pottery. So yeah.
Yeah. Definitely a lesson in patience for sure.
I bet.
So back to some book questions. If you could be any fictional character for a day, who would you be?
Oh gosh. I didn't think about that one. You had so many great questions. Fictional character for a day. Probably Anne of Green Gables. I loved that book growing up, and I just love like the environment that Ellen Montgomery wrote about in those books. And I would love to experience that, and through Anne's eyes. I think she's a great character. So probably Anne of Green Gables.
Have you had a chance to travel up to that part of North America?
No, I have not yet, and I want to. I've actually had friends that live in Canada that have invited me. So I might at some point, get up there. I hope so.
Yeah. Maybe not during the winter though.
Yeah, no. Probably spring, summer would be a good time to go to Canada, I would say.
Regarding all of your books, what is a common stereotype that you hope to break with your work?
Oh gosh, I can't think of anything in particular that I would want to break as far as stereotypes. I guess with Gothic fiction, a lot of times there's a little bit of an opinion that it's cheap pulp fiction, that there's really nothing of depth or value to Gothic fiction. And I think this comes from, the kind of pulpy fiction that was out in the 70s and 80s with Gothic fiction, which I absolutely love, by the way. And I love the book covers of the woman running from the haunted house. And I think that those stories have a lot of archetypes in them. And especially as someone who is an intersectional feminist, I really see that we can, as women writers, reclaim a lot of those stereotypical tropes and characters and actions that happen in those novels and kind of reset them in a little bit more of a modern, inclusive framework. And I definitely try to do that with my work. Especially with my inclusion of queer characters in my work. And I think there's a lot of queer overtones in old Gothic fiction that maybe weren't like out there completely, especially with like Daphne du Maurier's work. And it's all there, but it's kind of like under the surface. And so I really try with my work to kind of incorporate some of that. And, I hear a lot of people say, well, that's really modern. And it's not necessarily that it's modern, because especially like queer people have existed, all through time. But I guess the modern part of that comes out in that we're less afraid to talk about it nowadays and have it in our artwork in a little bit more of an open way. And so I kind of do that a little bit more. But as far as stereotypes, I think there's a lot of stereotypes with Gothic work. I think some of them maybe are true, some are not. And so I kind of like surprising people, I would say.
Excellent. And I really love the fact that you create realistic, even though you got speculative fiction in there, in terms of characters, you have realistic characters. You've got people, like you said, who are going to have different orientations because that's what's represented in our world, whether it's
Mhm.
back in time or in modern times, it's there. And so I think it creates a more in-depth, like intense story when you've got more rounded characters in that way.
Thank you. Yeah, I really try to, I think historical fiction historically has been really, really white, a lot of white characters doing white things. And I I think that and a lot of white straight characters doing those sorts of things. And I kind of want to like pull in what the world really looks like in my work. And there's this misinformation out there that like historical fiction has to look a certain way. And I love that historical fiction is becoming more diversified with lots of different authors from lots of different backgrounds starting to write it and it being more of a genre that is developing and growing that way.
Mhm. I've not read the Bridgerton novels, but I really like that they had a diverse cast of characters for the TV show.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too. I think that that was really a good thing that happened.
If you had no limitations or budgets on a project, what do you think you would embark on?
Oh goodness, I would go on a major, major research trip anywhere in the world, really. But probably, I've always wanted to go to Scotland and spend a long time, like in the Highlands, and kind of exploring that part of the UK. I, I've just there's just something about it that pulls me. So I would probably just go on this really awesome, like month long trip to the UK and just spend a ton of time there, kind of absorbing all of those amazing, like gothic vibes there. So,
That sounds fun.
yeah, yeah, wouldn't that be great?
What is something that you wish you'd known when you first started on your creative journey?
I wish I would have known how long it would take um, to get to where I was going because whenever I was younger, and I see a lot of younger people struggling this way. So I'm just going to put this out there and even like my daughter, she and I were having a conversation about this the other day because she's very creatively inclined herself and thinks she might want to be a writer someday. And I see a lot of younger people thinking that if they're not published by such and such age, that, it's all over, that they're not going to ever be published or and if you do get published younger, that's great, and there are plenty of young authors out there that have been published while they're still in high school, even who are doing wonderful work. But I think giving yourself the grace and the time to learn and grow in your craft is a wonderful thing that every author needs. And having those years for that to develop and to learn about your voice and what you enjoy writing and what inspires you to become a writer. If you spend those years, it's going to stick. You know that it's something that you really, really want to do. And that perseverance is going to serve you so well in publishing because even after you get published, even after you get an agent, things happen. Agents retire, or, you might have to start querying again at some point. Publishers turn down your proposals. Like, even if you've been published before and have 2 or 3 books, like you can present a pitch and it might get rejected. So rejection happens at all stages of being an author, and just learning to be resilient, to not take it personally and to move forward and to keep writing and learning about your craft. Not that, because publishing is not a meritocracy. It's really not. Like I have friends who are amazing authors who are way more talented than I am that have not been lucky yet. And luck is a lot to do with it. It really is luck and timing and things that you can't control. I always tell people to focus on the things you can control. And that's like getting those new ideas that light you up and reading widely and learning the most that you can about your craft, attending conferences, meeting people. You just never know, you know. So many of my friends that I met on Twitter, especially like 5 or 6 years ago, before any of us were agented or published or anything, are now like best-selling authors. And it's really wild, like to think about that we all kind of started, you know, just trying to get a draft finished. And now, you know, some of them are just big time authors. So it's pretty cool.
Excellent. What are some resources you recommend for those pursuing writing as a career, whether it be a craft book or a website?
Oh, there are lots of really great resources out there. I love podcasts. Right Now by Sarah Warner is one of my favorites. Craft books, I love the Emotions Thesauri by Angela Ackerman. Those are really great. The Emotional Wound Thesaurus is something that I usually recommend to pretty much any writer that I'm either mentoring or critiquing to help. And that was because that book was recommended to me by one of my mentors and became really, really helpful to me. I've heard really great things about Save the Cat. I just bought that book for my daughter, and I've heard because she wants to learn how to outline. Outlining is kind of like a struggle for her right now with her story craft. So I bought her that book because I've heard really good things about it. Take Off Your Pants by Libby Hawker is an amazing book. It's a very short book, but it really teaches you. That's how I learned how to plot, because she teaches you how to plot from like a character-driven angle. And Right Hive is one of the best resources out there. There's tons of free content with Right Hive. Rev Pit is a wonderful mentorship contest that writers can enter to earn a developmental edit from a professional editor. And I met an amazing editor through Rev Pit that I ended up hiring. Her name's Maria Turow, and she helped me completely rework the manuscript that became Parting the Veil. So if you can find an editor, a freelance editor, and can afford one to work with you, it's like a masterclass in craft. They really go deep into your work and tell you what your strong points are and what your weak points are and what you can do to improve your writing at a craft level. And so there are lots of different things that you can do, but really the most important thing that you can do is to read as much as you can. And you can't be a writer without being a reader. It's just not possible.
Excellent. So one final question. This was a fun one. What is your favorite movie and what does it reveal about you?
Oh gosh, my favorite movie. That one's tricky because I have two that actually I have three that are my all-time favorites. Can I tell you what all three are?
Sure.
Amadeus, Atonement, and Cold Mountain. Those are my top three. And I also love The Others. I have to put that out there too. The Others, like for the gothic part of me, that's my all-time favorite horror movie. But those four movies are movies that I've watched over and over throughout my life for different reasons. With Atonement, it's the cinematography and how color is used to tell a story in that movie. Plus the book is absolutely lovely. Ian McEwan wrote that book and it's beautiful. Cold Mountain is also one of my favorite novels. Charles Frazier inspired me. The first 10 pages of that novel are basically the main character looking out a window and describing what he sees, and he does it in such, the craft in those 10 pages is astounding and makes you want to read on, even though the subject matter would sound boring if you just told someone. That's just what he sees looking out a window. And The Others, I love the subtleness of the horror in that movie. And with Amadeus, I'm a huge music nerd. I always tell people that Mozart was my first crush. So I was at one point in time studying to be a concert pianist. So I loved that movie. It was a really good movie. And there's just so much like beautiful music in that movie, and also just the cinematography, the acting is superb. F. Murray Abraham in that movie is astounding as Salieri. So he earned that Academy Award. Absolutely. So there are just lots of really great movies that have spoken to me over the years. But I think as a creative person, like having those different outlets, whether it's movies or music or poetry or anything that like inspires you to create something yourself, is huge.
Excellent. Paulette, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your wisdom and the story of you and all of your creative pursuits. Listeners, please check the show notes for links to learn more about Paulette and purchase her books. You will not regret it. They are delicious and wonderful to read. So thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Tammy.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.